Let's answer a few questions before we wrap up today's edition of PFTPM as I talk some more to fill in this gap as I try to find my Twitter icon here. And now I am looking for the tweet calling for questions. Here it is. What do we have? I sort of looked at some of these today. Some days I don't look at all. Some days I just have a minute or two to look through them to see if there's any I like. PFTPM Bossy. Wouldn't the Deion Sanders upper room of the Hall of Fame end up like the regular Hall of Fame, where all the politicking and popularity contests would ultimately impact it, even if the selectors are the former players already in? There would be an element of that, but this is know it when you see it. This is no dispute. We know who the clear-cut upper room guys are. And if you truly want to maintain the sense of exclusivity, those individuals are going to keep a higher bar. They're not going to feel compelled to let someone in every year to enhance the parade through the streets of Canton. You know, we're now at the point where they're 8, 9, 10 every year. It's a business. Canton becomes relevant to the sports world for one weekend out of the year. You can't have a year where you just say, you know what, no one qualifies this year. Come back next year. They got to have the parade. They got to have the ceremony. They got to bring in thousands of people. They tie the game to teams represented by players getting in to get more people to come there, fill the stadium, fill the hotels, fill the restaurants. It's a chamber of commerce dream. And Canton's a great town, but Canton's not an NFL city. It was, and it's the host of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But the regular enshrinement process is so fueled by the business realities of keeping that museum viable. That's the one weekend of the year where it is its most viable. It's the only weekend where it's even relevant to the NFL. The upper room, Deion Sanders classification would be completely independent of that. They would decide, they would know. And I would trust them more. The guys who stand to have their status diluted by letting someone in who shouldn't be there because we like him, because he's a nice guy. You're either in or you're not. And we know who belongs and we know who doesn't belong. And I would fully and completely trust them. When I first heard the idea, I didn't like it. The more I thought about it, the more I talked about it, and I heard Deion explain it to Peter King. I love it, and I hope they do it. Hunter Wallace, which teams do you think can replace their quarterback with Caleb Williams if he can be acquired with a trade for the #1 overall pick? Look, there's 3 types of teams in the NFL. 1, teams that have shortlist franchise quarterbacks. 2, teams that don't. And 3, teams that have a quarterback that they think with time may eventually become a shortlist franchise quarterback. If Caleb Williams either isn't the presumed pick of the Cardinals, assuming they get the #1 overall selection, or if he just doesn't want to go there. If he tells the Cardinals, I'm not interested. What other teams could make the move? A lot of it depends upon what happens this year, but I think the Vikings are a team that is clearly looking for their next Fran Tarkenton. And if they thought it was Kirk Cousins, they would have Cousins signed beyond this year. I've said that more than a few times. Any of these other teams, we know who has a franchise quarterback and we know who doesn't. And I'm not lumping in there the young guys. Like the Steelers aren't going to come to the conclusion where they're done with Kenny Pickett after this year. It would take a disaster. And then you've got the other teams that have guys that are just getting started. But the folks out there with veteran quarterbacks who have had 3-4 years to become who they're going to be, they're in a position where they can make that assessment. But it's all about having a franchise quarterback. If you have a franchise quarterback, you have a team that is in a position to contend every single year. And there are maybe 5 or 6 teams right now that can say they have the true franchise quarterbacks. And the ones I think of are Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs, Josh Allen of the Bills, Jalen Hurts of the Eagles, Trevor Lawrence of the Jaguars. He's in that conversation. Joe Burrow, obviously, of the Bengals. And I don't know whether to put Justin Herbert there or not, because something's missing with Herbert and the Chargers. And it may be a Chargers thing, but at a certain point, if it is a Chargers thing, it becomes a Herbert thing. And Herbert doesn't strike me as like a Peyton Manning type who would eventually become so upset with what's happening around him that he starts expressing himself in a candid way that the things that are happening are not acceptable. Justin Herbert seems like a guy who'll just take it, go along to get along. Peyton Manning is a guy who would not tolerate it. Tom Brady is a guy who, once he was established, would not tolerate it. We're not good enough. We're not getting it done. I'm not going to worry about possibly ruffling feathers or upsetting people or disrupting the broader structure of the organization. We're not good enough. Justin Herbert needs to maybe be that guy who's willing to say difficult things internally, and if necessary, take it externally. If you try internally to fix what needs to be fixed and it doesn't work and you keep banging your head against a wall, at some point, you use your public platform. And if that doesn't get it fixed, it's time for Justin Herbert to think about another team. And I think about Matthew Stafford. He eventually left Detroit and got his Super Bowl championship, but he seemed to be a guy who tolerated mediocrity. He wasn't going to do anything to upset the apple cart. He wasn't wired that way. I remember when Reggie Bush joined the Lions, and Reggie Bush had won a Super Bowl with the Saints, so he kind of knows what it takes to be a great team. The Lions were struggling. Bush wanted to have a players-only meeting, and Stafford didn't want to do it. It's like, wait a minute. You got a guy who knows how to make the sausage, who's been there while they made the sausage that won a championship, and he thinks that it's time for a players-only meeting. And you got a quarterback that is still fairly early in his career and hasn't done much, and he's saying no. It's not enough to just be able to throw a football really far and really fast and really accurately. There's a leadership component. So I didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but I'm wrestling with whether or not to consider Justin Herbert a true shortlist franchise quarterback. And I got to put Lamar Jackson in that conversation as well. I think Jackson gets in before Herbert. If there is a sixth, it's Lamar. We'll see what he does this year with the new offense. He may cement that spot. He's in that bridge between clear-cut shortlist franchise and really, really good, but not quite franchise. And I know he's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL right now, but the Ravens decided that paying him $52 million a year was better than the alternative of not having him at all. But there's been some regression and injuries and not being able to play. That's part of what makes a franchise quarterback. Franchise quarterback is available each and every week. Franchise quarterback doesn't get injured. Franchise quarterback, if he does get injured, finds a way to get back on the field quickly. So those are the reasons why Jackson's on the cusp. Herbert's on the cusp for different reasons. Herbert plays through injury. Herbert just doesn't lead the way that he needs to. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But back to the original question, I can't remember what it was. Any team that doesn't have a franchise quarterback, and is coming back to me now, would be in the mix to try to get Caleb Williams if they think that Williams, if they have their own assessment of it. If they think he's a guy that can transform them into a perennial contender and he's more likely to be great than to not be great, and you have the infrastructure in place to develop him, that's a team that would want to consider him. Sam Eichenlob, what is the best, worst car you have ever owned? And hang on, I have to do something here real quick related to the access to the house we're in. Somebody needs the code for the garage so they can get inside. All right. Best, worst car I've ever owned. Well, I'll run through the whole list of cars I've owned and I'll let you decide. I inherited a Volkswagen Beetle from my sister. That was my first car. What my parents did for me, and I was very appreciative of it, it was yellow. They paid to have it painted silver, and all the chrome was blacked out. It was pretty nice. That was my first car. Second car was a Ford Fairmont, but not just the regular Ford Fairmont. It was a Ford Fairmont Futura. It was sleeker. It had angles. It was a piece of crap, but it was my second car. White with kind of a red velvet. I was ensconced in velvet interior, and it was the only car I ever owned with that giant front seat. It used to be a selling point. Oh, we got bucket seats. It used to be a rarity to have bucket seats in a car. We had those big, giant sit four across in the front row cars, and that's what the Ford was. Then, now that was my college car. I went from the Volkswagen high school. It died when it was time to go to college. I had the Ford Fairmont Futura all through college. Law school car was a Volkswagen Jetta that I loved. It was a manual transmission. I didn't know how to drive it when I bought it. My mom transferred the title and everything over. I came home from a weekend early in my first year of law school, and she said, hey, the new car is ready to go and you can't drive the old one anymore. It's like, I don't know how to drive a stick. She said, well, no time like now to learn. And that was a hell of a way. I got thrown into the pool. I had to figure out how to swim, and I did that weekend. So that was a great car. I had that through law school. I had a Mitsubishi Galant. I bought that right before I started my first job in 1991. black Mitsubishi Galant. I wanted to splurge for the Diamante. That was the higher end Mitsubishi sedan back then, but I was being careful with my money. I was getting used to the idea of having a regular paycheck, and I just didn't want to overdo it. In hindsight, I wish I would have. 1995 came a Subaru Legacy, white, all-wheel drive, paid a little extra for leather seats. That was a car we had from 95 through 2001. 2001, I bought a used Audi A4. 2004, I bought a Volkswagen Touareg, the SUV. It was nice, big red Volkswagen Touareg. I remember taking my son to buy it that day, and we negotiated and all that stuff, and we got it done, and that was just a fun time. Audi Q7, a couple of years after that. Audi RS4. See, this is when I started to make money. The Audi RS4 that I bought in 2012, black with black and red interior. Awesome. Stick shift. It was a beast of a car, and I'd like to find one and get it back, because I kind of wish I'd kept it, although it was a 2008 and it was, it had some miles and it was kind of showing its age in comparison to the newer cars. Then I traded that for Alfa Romeo Giulia, which I loved. It wasn't a standard, but it had very responsive paddle flippers on the wheel. And now most recently I've got an Audi RS7. So I'll have to say, I mean, really, when we do the progression, I'll say the best car was the RS7, although I love the RS4, but the RS7 is great. And when you turn it on, like if my son borrows it and I'm sitting in my office and he presses the button, it sounds like a rocket going off. That's how that engine sounds on the RS7. It's like 600 horsepower. And the worst one was probably the Fairmont Futura, because I can't do that to the Beetle. The Beetle was my first car. How can your first car be a worse car? So you probably regret asking that question. You got my whole history of vehicles, but isn't it wild? Like you live and you drive for so many years, and I'm not somebody who I keep a car for about 3 or 4 years. I've kept them longer, but I'm already getting the itch to explore a new one. So we'll see if that happens. I'll take suggestions. Give me your suggestions of the next car I should get on Twitter, and we'll see if we can work it out. Matt Bostock, does the Northwestern hazing scandal in college football impact NFL teams when it comes to potential future draft picks for those involved, and similar stories of rookies in NFL being hazed? I don't know what impact this has on the NFL. I expect when Peter Skoronski, the Titans' first-round pick this year, is available to the media in training camp, he's going to be asked about Northwestern, and he'll probably I don't want to prejudge what he's going to say. We'll see what he says. Maybe he'll confirm some of the reporting. Maybe he'll defend Pat Fitzgerald. Maybe he'll express frustration with the school for not standing behind their head coach. I mean, that Fitzgerald had a lot to do with Skoronski being the 11th overall pick in the draft. But I think there's still more to be learned about how deep that rabbit hole went. I think the bigger issue relates to college football, because I think by the time you're in the NFL, that kind of stuff doesn't go on. If a guy's not good enough, he just gets cut. He doesn't have to get hazed. He doesn't have to be subject to some sort of discipline from teammates. And the rookie hazing doesn't seem to be as bad as it used to be, although we still hear stories from time to time about a rookie being stuck with a gigantic dinner bill, and I thought we had evolved away from that. I thought that with the Jonathan Martin situation in Miami, with, what am I blanking on? Richie Incognito. Forgetting his name there. That was 10 years ago. That was a big deal when everything blew up between them. I thought they had kind of maybe moved away from hazing and inappropriate behavior in the locker room. But, in many respects, we hear stories from time to time. I think they're very good at keeping it quiet. I think that's part of the culture. No snitching, no speaking publicly about the things that really go on here. But there's been this sense that aspects of pro football organizations are still trapped in the 1950s and 60s. So who knows? If there's stuff going on, they're doing a good job of covering it up. But at some point, you would think, with all these guys that move from team to team, somebody would be sufficiently disgruntled, either during his career or after he's done, to blow the whistle on something. That he's pissed off about the way he was treated by a given team because they didn't think he was good enough, but he can't accept that. They were wrong, and I know about this thing that they were doing, so I'm going to go public with it. There's so many players out there, and there's so many different pathways for players to express their concerns about things that they witnessed that were improper. If it was happening in the NFL now, I think common sense suggests someone would be saying something about it. At the college level, I don't know. Because the guys who make it to the NFL, they really don't have an incentive to complain about anything that happened because it worked for them. The guys who didn't, this is a moment where, with what's happened at Northwestern and the power that we see that the players can have when they use their voices, will it cause other players who were mistreated within college football organizations, who felt like they couldn't complain about it, couldn't report it, couldn't do anything about it, and the coach knew or should have known or should have created a culture where these things wouldn't happen? Will we learn more about other programs out there? Because I can't imagine that Northwestern's the only place where that kind of stuff was going on. Arvind, could the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia swoop in and make a last-minute commander's offer of $7 billion with the promise of another $2 billion for stadium construction? Owning the DC team is a massive power play of soft power, and $9 billion with a stadium feels like a bargain for the Saudis entering the NFL through DC. I think it's too late to get involved in the Commanders, but let's take your hypothetical and let's apply it to another team. The Seahawks can be sold without 10% of the proceeds going to the state of Washington as of May 2024. And Jody Allen, who's administering her late brother Paul's estate, seems to be in no hurry to sell the team, but that's a team where the Public Investment Fund could make her an offer that she maybe wouldn't refuse, effective May of 2024. Or what if they just decide to approach an owner that we otherwise think doesn't want to sell his or her team? But once they put that offer on the table, maybe they do. You have to think, with the record being set last year, $4.65 billion for the Broncos, this year, $6.05 billion for the Commanders. In 1 year, it's gone up that much. What's the next rung on the ladder? And when do you find an owner who otherwise would be perfectly happy owning his team, finding out, maybe I could get $8 billion, maybe I could get $9 billion, maybe it's time to cash out. Maybe I've done everything I can do in the National Football League. I've won a Super Bowl. I'm not trying to name names or make guesses, but if you've done everything you set out to do and you're in a position to get a massive, I don't want to call it a windfall because it's worth whatever someone will pay for it, but in comparison to what you paid to get the team, it is a huge return. And then the question becomes, will the NFL let them do it? And if the NFL doesn't, what will they do? We still don't know that they're interested in football. There was a report last week that they're interested in soccer, tennis, and other sports. If one of those other sports is American football, if you don't let them in the front door, they may try to set up a competing house next door. And as someone who loves a good story with a lot of controversy and drama and flat out chaos, the idea of the Public Investment Fund creating a league and outbidding the NFL for the rights to players and setting up a single entity that owns and operates the league like the NFL should have done back in the 20s makes it easier to avoid antitrust laws, for example. If it's one entity and not 8, 16, 32, however many different businesses, it's easier to run it. There's a lot that they could do. Football season, competing league with NFL players. Part of me is rooting for it, frankly. I'd love to see how that story plays out. I'd love to see how it starts. I'd love to see how it proceeds. And I would be very interested in seeing how it all ends. Spider 2Y Banana. No, let me get this right. Spidey 2Y Banana. How far can you throw a football if you were to do so right now? Well, not very far because there's walls and windows in here. So it would go maybe 7 or 8 feet. But if I were to walk out on the beach, and maybe I'll try it. We have a football here. I could probably throw it 40 yards, probably, with a couple of warm-ups. And I've worked on my form from working with Chris, because what you're supposed to do, you point your front shoulder at your target and you pull back, and you don't throw like this. You throw like this. Although if you're Patrick Mahomes, you throw however you want and it gets there. But I could probably throw it 40 yards, probably. Although we don't have, the problem with the beach, there's no yard markers out there. We'd have to get a measuring stick and walk it off. But I think it would be 40 yards. Inverted Pyramid wants a Dalvin Cook update. We had one yesterday. No news since then. Drew Porter wants to know whether I think Jeff Bezos had interest in buying the Commanders and would he be blocked from ownership due to his prime deal? Look, they'll let him in. If he wants in, they're letting him in. I think he looked at the Commanders and realized, why do I want to spend $6 billion on a house that needs to be renovated? Why don't I just wait and buy a house that's ready to move into? I think he's waiting for the Seahawks. That's what I think. I don't know that, but I think he realized, why do I want to take on this turd of a franchise right now? And Commanders fans know that post Dan Snyder, it is kind of in that category. Why do I want to have to rebuild fan loyalty and come up with all these ideas and mechanisms and strategies for making the team beloved again and doing all the, when I could just get the keys to a team that already has it all figured out? Let's see. I should probably wrap it up. I'm looking for one more. Fishman WVU is a lifelong Washington fan. Is there still a chance Daniel Snyder could screw all of us fans and keep the team? I think it's too late by now. I think that the ship has sailed. The paperwork's been signed. All that's left at this point is for the owners to gather next Thursday, I believe it is, and vote up or down. And they're going to vote up. Unless there's some financial wrinkle that they've just decided can't be fixed, and Josh Harris refuses to do it, and the league decides that's a deal breaker, this thing's done. So if it falls apart now, I think it's going to have nothing to do with Snyder and everything to do with the league deciding that Josh Harris hasn't put together a deal that the league regards as viable. And if you're a Washington fan, and I don't mean this as a slight against Josh Harris. Look, he could come in and be the best owner in the NFL. But generally speaking, if I'm a fan, I want the owner of my team to be someone who can just write a check for the team, write a check for this player, write a check for that player, write a check for a new stadium. You want to have an unlimited supply of money where the budget is never an issue and the spending will be robust. Coaches, no salary cap. I want the best coaches. I'm going to pay, like David Tepper did. This all-star collection of assistant coaches. It's not just the head coach. So he's paying to get guys to go that otherwise wouldn't have gone, like a Jim Caldwell. Join the staff, get paid good money, really good money relative to the rest of the market. That's what you can do. There's no way to have a salary cap. There's no way to control coaching salary. So if you have that unlimited money and you want to win, that's the owner you want for your team. Unlimited money and overwhelming desire to win. I mean, really, really. Setting aside the diplomatic complications of having the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia own an NFL team, that team would probably end up being pretty good because they would be motivated to spend their way to relevance, to spend their way to contention, and to spend their way to a championship. And if you're a fan of that team, what do you care? You just want your team to be good. And there's a better chance the team is going to be good if ownership is willing to do whatever it takes to make that team good.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.